Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Emory Climate Talks. My name is Eri Saikawa, and I'm Associate Professor of Environmental Sciences at Emory University. When we started, there were not too many webinars, but now there seem to be so many that I thank you for joining us. Thank you so much to Leah Thomas, who's been helping with the series. We actually sent out a survey to the newsletter this morning. If you can help us figure out how we can move forward for the fall semester, we would really appreciate it. If you're wondering what this newsletter is about, please sign up for the newsletter using the link that we will provide in the chat box. You will get information about future webinars and about some recent news on climate change to your inbox. Also check out our website, climatetalks.emorydomains.org/webinars for more information as well. Please also do check out the YouTube channel for the past talks and subscribe it as well. As you might have noticed, we are recording today's talk and we will make it available in the next couple of days if you wanted to watch it again. For the recording purposes, we have muted your microphone, but if you have any questions during the talk, feel free to use the chat function that we have and type up the questions so that we can raise them during the Q&A. This webinar series is made possible by our anonymous donor that supports our trip to the UN climate change negotiations, and Emory Climate Talks is in partnership with the Department of Environmental Sciences and the Resilience and Sustainability Collaboratory at Emory University. Today, I'm so excited to have Ms. Mandy Mahoney, the president of Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. She has a bachelor's degree in biology and environmental studies, and also a law degree from Emory University. She has a master's degree in environmental management from Duke University as well. Before she was at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, she was at the City of Atlanta under Mayors Reed and Franklin. She was Georgia Trend's 2016 40 under 40 list, and also the Atlanta Business Chronicle's 2014 40 under 40 list. Mandy serves on the boards of the Piedmont Park Conservancy, the Turner Environmental Clinic, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, Southeast Wind Coalition, and the Mississippi Early Learning Alliance. Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance does a lot of work on equity as well as energy. And I think that their work is so relevant in this current Black Lives Matter movement and the COVID era that we are in. They made sure that there's going to be enough time for a Q&A. And so we will open up for questions later for the discussions that I'm very much looking forward to. But if you have any questions that you would like to raise during her talk, please feel free to write it in the chat so that we can get to them right after the talk is over. So with that, thank you so much, Mandy, for joining us. And I will give you the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Eri. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you today. And a number of my friends who are also on. Thank you all for being here. I especially want to thank a major influence in my life, John Wagner, a professor that I think many of you have or have had. I've spent many days and hours, both during my undergrad as well as after, tromping around the forests of our state and spending time paddling in coastal Georgia with him, and just learned a lot about being a human being as well as in how to look at the world. I often think about how I learned the native plants of the Southeast alongside John, and that has taught me how to diagnose a sick ecosystem. But I also, that same kind of intellectual framework can be applied when you're thinking about analyzing all systems, healthy or not. And so I'm so glad to be able to have been given that lens of system thinking through him. So John, thank you for what you gave to me and for so many people who are are with us today. As Ari said, I do serve as the president of the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, and we are based here in Atlanta. That we serve 11 states in the Southeast. If you could go to the next slide. And we're a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit, and we serve Virginia to Arkansas to Florida. And so the deep plantation South, as well as Appalachia and the Southern Florida. So we have many different types of communities in this region, and we work hard to ensure that we meet all of them where they are, listen to them, and help them in the ways that they are asking for help. Next slide. The issue areas that we have found our best service in is around energy efficiency policy. So helping elected and appointed officials think about what laws need to change, what new laws we need so that we can support more energy efficiency. We also do a lot of work in the built environment, which manifests in supporting building energy codes. It might shock you to know that only states like Alabama got a building energy code about 10 years ago, and the state of Mississippi does not have a building energy code to this day. So what that translates into is a lot of substandard buildings that are being built in our region that are not energy efficiency or energy efficient or not healthy buildings, and lead to just bad living conditions. And that's super exacerbated now that we know people are trapped inside with COVID, and you do not want to be living in a building with mold and mildew if you at all, but especially not if you've got COPD or asthma or COVID. So we see building codes as being essential for health, not just for saving energy. Energy efficient transportation. We're big fans of electric vehicles, heavy duty, like buses, to light duty vehicles, like my little Nissan Leaf that we drive. And so we also work with elected and appointed officials and utilities, car companies, et cetera, to try to advance programs and policies that support electric transportation. And we also look at what are new finance mechanisms that can be put in place to unlock access to healthy buildings, electric transportation, and more effective energy efficiency solutions like new increased insulation in buildings. So we look at what are new tools that we can adopt here in the region. And we'll talk more about these as we go forward. Next slide. So now we're going to get into a very wonky subject, energy efficiency and energy period. The regulation of energy is wonky. And I think that the field does itself a disservice by making it so esoteric, and it's very hard unless you're in the field of energy policy to actually understand the laws and regulation. And that means those are big barriers to entry. When we think about climate change, everyone on this call knows how substantial emissions from buildings and power plants are. And if we want those things to change, well, it requires energy policy to change. And a major thing preventing energy policy from changing is how wonky the regulation is. So let's learn about some of that wonk now. So moving on. We're going to focus on Georgia, since Emory's in Georgia. Y'all go to school in Georgia. I recognize a lot of people probably live in other places, but we're going to use Georgia as a case study for today. There are 3 different kinds of electric utilities. So people that sell electrons that you're going to consume in your home. The investor-owned utility is Georgia Power. Its parent company is Southern Company. It is regulated by the Georgia Public Service Commission, and it serves cities and the corridors between cities. But then as you move into the more rural parts of our state, you have electric membership cooperatives that are often referred to as co-ops. And they have historically, since like the 1930s, been the type of utility that serves people that are in more rural communities. That exception is Cobb EMC, and they serve Cobb County, which is northwest Metro Atlanta. And that's because Cobb has not always been urban. And so Cobb EMC was formed when that part of our state was not urban. And now it is, but Cobb is still their utility. And then finally, there's the municipal utility. So that'll be a part of a city government, just like a water utility is a part of a city government. And there's actually a city department that will control the sale of electrons. In the EMC and municipal utility space, they may or may not generate the electrons that they sell you. They may buy them, for instance, from Georgia Power, and then they will like resell them. Sometimes they do also generate their own electricity, and you've seen more aggressive moves in the very recent past by some of these co-ops in building large-scale renewables, for instance. And because they are not regulated by the Public Service Commission or by a city, they actually can move more quickly sometimes. But let's get into what a Public Service Commission is. Next slide. So Public Service Commissions are generally things nobody has any clue exists. They are a state governing body, just like a state legislature you know about, a court you know about, but people often don't know what a PSC is. And Public Service Commissions regulate electricity, water, natural gas, sometimes broadband, depending on what their charter is. And all of them in the region have commissioners that are appointed or elected in various different ways. None of them are consistent, which is a little maddening. But what matters about the how of how they get elected is that we believe it's not allowing for a fair representation of the public to be selected to serve on the commission. So you have, for instance, in Georgia, the Georgia Public Service Commission is elected. This year on the ballot, there are 2 seats that you can vote for if you are a Georgia resident. And oftentimes people don't vote what's called down ballot. You vote for the president in the presidential election, or if it's a mayoral race, you vote for that. And then you don't worry about the rest of the races because you probably didn't even know that was a thing you were going to vote on that day. But so that's hard for the public service commissions because we're not getting people who care about these issues and are impacted to help make the decision on who should actually be elected to the Public Service Commission. The second thing is that in Georgia, you are elected to serve a district. So similar to how John Lewis served Atlanta as in Congress, there are districts of the Public Service Commission. But what's a vestige of another era in Georgia is that the entire state votes to elect for that district. And I personally believe that means that you're not, it's hard to get the right people for that district elected because you're really watering it down by making it a statewide race. I also think that this is an area where appointed commissions are better than elected commissions. Electricity, like I said a couple minutes ago, is a very wonky field. We see better decisions come out of commissions where people are appointed. For instance, in North Carolina, the governor appoints, and that way you're able to appoint people that have deep knowledge in electricity, water, or the other issues that commission's regulating. And you get a much deeper level of analysis and discussion in commissions where you have experts who are actually serving on the Public Service Commission. I don't think this is going to change anytime soon. You know, a classic adage in policy is once people have been given power, you can't take it away from them. And so I think that this is what we're going to see as regulation going forward in the South. But I do encourage you, if you live in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, or Georgia, to educate yourself before you go to vote, so that you, and to also help your friends and colleagues and parents know that the Public Service Commission's a thing, and that you need to look at who's running before you go to vote. A couple things that are important in Georgia about, that Georgia Power deals with is how much renewables are they going to generate? How are they going to monitor and clean up the coal ash ponds that are here with the coal-fired power plants in Georgia? What are the goals that the company has around carbon emissions? And regulators, the Public Service Commissioners, are the people who are supposed to push and pull the power company to continue to serve the needs of the state, to continue to serve and address those issues like generating more renewables, addressing climate change. And so these are seats that matter when you care about the issues that all of us on this webinar care about today: climate change and clean energy, and also energy equity and energy burden. So moving on. Other important groups that play in this ecosystem, you have ratepayer advocates are a type of nonprofit typically that specifically advocate for ratepayers. And that's generally code for people that are of low income, because it's hard for them to be at public meetings and advocating for themselves. Energy offices are state offices. The Georgia Environmental Facilities Authority is the Georgia State Energy Office. They receive federal funding from Department of Energy and administer programs like a weatherization program. A weatherization program goes out to low-income homes and adds insulation, fixes holes in roofs, so to try to make the house more livable and also decrease the electricity bill. And then environmental agencies such as the Georgia Department of Natural Resources or the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Those are typically the agencies that a governor will direct to do like a climate plan. North Carolina's DEQ is doing that currently at the direction of their governor. That is not happening in the state of Georgia right now, but I dream of one day that we will have that happen in our state. Next slide. When we look at the types of policies that energy efficiency is regulated by, it gets wonkier from here. An energy efficiency resource standard is another name for a goal. A public service commission will say, you must spend X amount of dollars on energy efficiency. You must commit to saving Y amount of kilowatt hours over a given time period. For instance, but just in shorthand, it's just setting a goal. Utility business model policies, that is looking at how to incentivize a utility to do energy efficiency and to keep them whole. Cost effectiveness policies, that is when you're trying to decide, is this a good program or not? Should we be spending utility dollars to weatherize a home, or should we be spending utility dollars to weatherize a small business? And so there's a whole set of different metrics that the industry has developed to evaluate, is this a good or bad program? Integrated resource planning is when a utility will look at all of the different resources, i.e. what they use to generate electricity, how they move electricity through the system, and how they save electricity as they're thinking about what their planning is going to be. Another way to call this is just a strategic plan for electricity generation and delivery. And then program participation policies, that's defining who do you want to receive the benefits of the energy efficiency program that you are offering, and how are you going to do that? So you normally think about all of this suite of policies together whenever you're regulating energy efficiency, and the documents that support these are typically hundreds of pages long. They're very, very detailed. And there's a lot of thought over the last 30 years of energy efficiency policy that has been given to this body of work. Moving on. This is a map. So we don't have a lot of these goals in the South. Arkansas, North Carolina, and Virginia do. And when you have goals, you tend to perform against your goals. So I would like to see this in more states, but politics has gotten in the way. Next slide. In Arkansas is our best goal so far. And you'll see numbers like 1.2%. That seems really low, right? When I first got into the energy efficiency field, I'm like, we're talking about 1%, really? But what it means is 1% of all of the sales of that utility for the year, you're trying to decrease it by 1%. The idea is that you do that every year, so it's additive. But we still need to go further than that. Next slide. Another thing that just bewildered me when I got into energy efficiency 10 years ago is the idea that we had to incentivize electric utilities to do energy efficiency. And the reason that we do incentivize them is because they're going to make less money when they decrease the electrons that they're selling. And the agreement that has been struck in the land of public policy is that they're a business. They should be able to recover the costs that they've lost when they are doing energy efficiency. Therefore, we will develop metrics and that will allow them to be whole as they do energy efficiency. And this is another area that you can read a tremendous amount. But in the interest of time, I'm going to proceed. Next slide. Performance incentives are another example of how to incentivize utilities to do as much energy efficiency as they can. Next slide. And this is an example. There's a range of how to do it, just depending on what the politics are in the given state. Next slide. This is another example of how we talk about that. Next slide. I talked earlier about cost effectiveness, choosing what program you're going to do. You can see, should we or should we not incentivize people to have more efficient refrigerators or water heaters is an example that a utility might put before the commission to decide. Should we incentivize when people are building new homes that they are built to a higher energy efficiency standard? Should we be incentivizing people to use LED lighting in commercial buildings? Should we be supporting deeper weatherization in low-income homes? And you're trying to balance all these things because there's only so much money that can go into it. And so it's a robust discussion that happens. Next slide. Keep going. We can just keep cycling through, Ari. Next. 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 We will make these slides available so that y'all can learn more about this if this is an area of interest to you. And then you also, and one thing that I'll flag that I've always thought was an interesting conundrum within the energy efficiency field. So we have big industries. Northwest Georgia is the carpet capital of the world, and they use a lot of electricity to make carpet. And they know that by being more efficient in the carpet manufacturing process, that they will just have a better business. They don't need to waste money. So a lot of industrial customers will argue that they should not have to pay into energy efficiency programs because they're doing it themselves. And so they fight for industrial opt-outs. And in places where the industrial customers are not allowed to opt out or escape from participation, the same customers who fought to be opted out once the program goes in take advantage of the programs and will testify within a year as to how beneficial having those programs offered by the utility were. But when it's a very interesting part of politics is once an industry group has decided they don't want to be regulated, you cannot produce any amount of data or stories or peers to help them decide to change that opinion to say, no, we do want to give away some of our money for this program. And even though we do know on paper it's in our best interest, but we always find that they fight to not be regulated. Moving on. Workforce diversity, inclusion, and integration. This is a really important topic for us and for me personally. I grew up about an hour south of Atlanta in Macon, and Macon, while it's an hour away, it's a world away. And like many southern towns in the deep south, it is haunted by the ghosts of slavery. And it is, I always like to remember that Macon waited to desegregate its public schools until the last day allowable by federal law in 1973, 20 years after Brown v. Board. And I personally think that tells you all you need to know about the leadership of the town. It was very closed-minded. It remains closed-minded today. And I experienced a tremendous amount of racism just in the ecosystem I grew up in Macon. And I was also taught by the Sisters of Mercy, by an order of Catholic nuns, and they had come to Macon to do mission work. And it was the schools I went to were the only private schools that were not segregation academies, that were not created for white people to escape to during desegregation. And they taught us social justice from kindergarten on. And I have very clear memories of Sister Bernarda in first grade reading us stories about poverty and about justice. And that stuck with me and really flourished as I got older and led me into the field now of I, at the end of the day, see my job as supporting more equitable distribution of natural resources. And electricity is the issue I'm working on now, but I think access to food and water and arable land is equally important as electricity. And as we look at the why is the environmental movement not getting the job done right now? I think that we have a duty to look in the mirror and recognize that the environmental community has historically been very white, highly educated, liberal, and we have lived in that bubble. I have lived in that bubble, and I've been working really hard in my time at SEIA to get out of that bubble, to ingratiate myself in other circles, to make new friends, to listen to people, especially to Black people who are leaders in the Deep South. And I feel like if we could listen to them and take direction from them as environmentalists, then we would be able to address the problems more effectively. But that takes work on self, identifying how we as individuals need to change how we live our lives so that we can be in community with people of color more effectively. And so at SEIA, we share that ethic and view as a staff and as a board. And that's something that we've been working on for the last 10 years. And it's grown and it's grown, and it's been a virtuous cycle. And so I'll talk in the next section, I'm going to talk more about our journey and how we're doing this work. You could, next slide. So we established just values and pursue equitable solutions. We thought it was really important that we named the historic prejudice in the South. The energy systems that we are living with today are just like housing and transportation systems, which are layers and layers of unjust racist policies that have been built up by segregationists since the end of the 1800s, at the end of Reconstruction. And there's so many layers now that it's hard to even know where an actual racist policy is, or if it's an application of a racist policy. But we believe that we must talk about the fact that this history exists, and the inequality is alive and well in our region, because acknowledgement is the first step to change. Next slide. So this tells you a little bit about the workforce. It has been hit extremely hard by COVID, as we've, so many energy efficiency people, it's about going into homes and businesses. And right now you can't go into homes and businesses. So the industry is trying to pivot to be able to support energy efficiency upgrades, because, it's this crazy catch-22. People who are suffering from COVID need to be in homes that have good indoor air quality. And indoor air quality and energy efficiency manifest one and the same. You're going to do the same things to upgrade a home, like putting weatherization in, fixing holes, removing water damage that is causing mold and mildew. 80% of the people in Georgia that have COVID are Black and brown. We know that our data shows us that they're also most likely living in inefficient housing that's likely unhealthy housing because of humidity in this state, the lack of investment in weatherizing homes, and the fact that we don't have ways now to get into these homes to make these energy efficiency upgrades for these people is just really maddening. And we take the responsibility to figure out how to address that, because we recognize the need is greater than it has ever been. Keep going. You can see that the jobs numbers, keep going. And this, this just supports what I was saying about the job losses. And unfortunately, it is what you see. Black and brown people and Latinx people, they are the ones who lose their jobs first, who suffer the consistent discrimination the most. And that's been, unfortunately, the case with the clean energy workforce too in COVID. Next. This house could be anywhere in Atlanta, in the rural South. Like 57% of the buildings in the South are older than 20 years old. And most of them, the buildings that are even built recently, are built to old building code standards. So you have a lot of really poor quality buildings in the region. And proportionally, people that are Black and brown, because that is historically the low, like it goes back to slavery, the low that has traveled with and kept people in poverty since the Civil War. And it's manifesting now, and those people are unfortunately living in really substandard housing. Keep going. And so this is an area that we do a tremendous amount of work on. Next. So what the heck is this term energy burden? It's simply looking at how much of your monthly income goes to paying energy bills, both electricity and gas. Next. And no surprise, the South has the highest energy burden in the country, and also the highest rates of threatening to be disconnected from electricity because, you know, people have not been able to pay their bills. And we know that low-income people make choices between paying for their electricity, are they going to buy food or medicine? And another thing that we don't talk about a lot is that people make the choices to turn off their electricity or to turn off their air conditioning, or do anything they can to just keep their electricity on. And it's really hot right now. I'm glad I am able to keep my AC at a comfortable temperature. I cannot imagine if I was worried about my electricity bill and had to turn my AC off for this week just to be able to make sure I could pay it. Especially if I had a health condition, that could be life-threatening. Next slide. So when you scan out and look at energy burden around the region, the darker the red, the worse it is, right? That the amount that is supposed to be reasonable for people to be able to afford is a 0 to 6%. But can you imagine if you lived in Noxubee, I'm sure I'm not saying that right, Noxubee County, Mississippi, and you 16% of your monthly income was going to go to keep your light bill or pay for your light bill to keep your electricity on. That's a lot of money. And you know, the other thing I'll observe, the first thing I noticed when we started looking at this data, the dark red, that is the Black Belt. That is the former Plantation South. That is the area of the country where the deepest, most abundant cotton plantations were. And so I just think that's a real stark reminder of what I call the ghosts of slavery that are still with us today. Keep going. And you can't, thank you, Molly, Noxubee. I've been told, Noxubee County, Mississippi. So yeah, we can't just think about electricity alone. We got to think about transportation costs, food costs, rent, water, transportation, I said again, but we know that poor people are more likely to live in food deserts, more likely to have to take 3 buses to get to work. So when you layer energy on top of that, it's quite overwhelming to think that you're gonna be able to make ends meet. Next. And the numbers are high. What, 15.4 million Americans in the South suffer from energy insecurity. Of course, it's the highest percentage in the nation, but we have to be present to that reality. Next. Keep going. Next. Yeah, much of this I already said, but I think when you start seeing these double-digit figures about our population, it really just shows you how intense energy burden and energy insecurity are here. Next. Oh, I said 57% earlier. That was wrong. 84% of our housing stock is more than 20 years old. Next. And yeah, as we think about energy burden, we think it's important to look at the layers of it, to not just talk about the monthly energy bill, but to also think about the structural issues, the physical insecurity or infrastructure that is at the home, the poor quality of infrastructure, and then also to look at the decisions people are forced to make to just be able to keep their lights on. Next slide. And this is another way. We just ran this map recently. It tells you the same story that I shared earlier about, again, this is the Black Belt. This is where all the plantations were. And as you look at energy burden across the minority population, the data speaks for itself. It tells you these things are correlated and we must talk about them. And that's a big deal for the energy efficiency field. People have not been talking about it. So we at SEIA are talking about it, and we're finding the more we talk about it, the more other people want to join us and talk about it too. And that does the heart good. Next. Here are some examples of resources that we have, we've put together, and we will be sharing this, but I encourage you to avail yourselves of these resources. Next. So who am I? I'm a mom. I have a 6-year-old. And when I think and talk about how Sister Bernarda influenced me in 1st grade, I take really seriously that I, as a mom, have to teach my child how to be an anti-racist. And I've been learning a lot about myself by trying to teach Paul. And that's been wonderfully, wonderfully life-giving work. I get to run this amazing organization that is SEIA. And we have an outstanding team of people who come together, working shoulder to shoulder to make change in the region. And then I'm thankful to be able to be on many different boards with some outstanding people who have similar values. Mindy Goldstein, who runs the Turner Environmental Law Clinic, is one of the most outstanding visionary leaders we have in the region. And I would even say nationally, on environmental justice, food access, energy burden. Like, she's just amazing. And if y'all ever get a chance to study under Mindy or go to anything that the clinic does, I just encourage you to do that, because it's a really special organization. And yeah, think back to my time at Emory. I went to Oxford, the college, and then finished my law degree at Emory. And I'm really thankful that I took advantage of a lot of non-academic opportunities that complemented my ability for the academic learning. One of my favorite memories is John supported me in applying for a grant program, and a group of us, and he went with us to DC to actually attend a national environmental conference. And in college, being able to find the organization and to fundraise and to take a group to do that, it was a really empowering thing. It gave me a lot of confidence in myself that I could do this work at an early age. I, as a young person, could make change. I didn't need to wait until I was the old age of 41, which I am now. And I'm so glad that I availed myself of those opportunities. And I just encourage y'all to do that. I also have a very fond memory of, this is also, I'm not sure why we were on the coast, but John and I and a few other students were on the coast, and a group called the Georgia Conservancy was having a conference, and I went up to a woman and said, I would like to work for you. Here is my resume, and I had my own little sales pitch. And she hired me. Her name is Susan Kidd. She's now the Director of Sustainability for Agnes Scott College and remains a dear friend and mentor. But I was glad I took that risk and put myself out there. And now running a nonprofit myself, I understand why Susan was so, it was easy to hire me, because nonprofits, we don't have a lot of bandwidth to find interns. And so when I was able to say to her, I would like to work for you, here's what I would like to do, and I have figured out a way for Emory to pay for me to do it, it was a no-brainer that she would hire me. And so I also just encourage you, as you're looking at ways to get yourself started in this field, that please just find ways to resource yourself, scope out projects. I also remember that I would do my master's thesis for Duke. When I was working for Susan, we determined that this was the first water conservation plan that the state of Georgia was ever going to do. We were in the middle of a big drought again. Department of Natural Resources needed a state plan. In the classic government work, they had one person, she had no budget and no staff. And so I offered myself up to do my master's thesis for her to be the actual water conservation plan for the state of Georgia. That was an amazing win-win, because then I had that amazing experience of having to actually write an official document that became a state plan. But also it was a great thing for my resume as I went out to, looking for work. And yeah, so it's just like, be entrepreneurial, trust your gut, go out and just find something. And that, I believe, as a young person, that fortitude and determination will be rewarded. And I'm recognizing that I should stop talking now because we are supposed to be in Q&A. So I will do that.
Okay, that was great. Thank you so much. We cannot really give a round of applause. I'm sure everybody is giving that from where they are. That was so great. So yes, we are going to move to the discussion Q&A section. So you see some of you have been typing different things in the chat box, but if you have any questions, please do. While waiting, I have the privilege to ask her the first question. I was just curious, there's so much the link between anti-racist policies and the energy policies that we can be pushing for. I just wonder, what would be the policy that can move both forward that you will be advocating for at this moment?
We need leading edge building energy code policies. Like, I know you've got Sean Aurora coming on to talk on Monday about the net zero building that they've got or the living building, sorry, at Georgia Tech. It would be absolutely amazing if low income homes were built to a living building standard. That would because, as Sean will tell you, they've designed their building to use rainwater for potable water. They're not going to pay the city of Atlanta a water bill. They are collecting renewable energy. So their energy bill from Georgia Power is going to be a lot less. It is a crazy efficient building. So they don't even need much electricity to begin with. And it is built to this really high, healthy building standard. So you feel better. You don't have toxic chemicals in your lungs as you're breathing in that building. And I mean, I believe that is, rich people should not be the only people that are getting access to that, but like low income people are the people that need access to that, because we need it's an impediment to have substandard housing for learning, for living. And until we pass better building codes, builders will not be building better quality buildings.
Yeah, sorry, I should have had you in the full video screen when you were saying that. I apologize. Yeah, that's great. So I think everybody is very moved by what has been talked about, and I see a lot of thank you messages. I'm not seeing any particular question. And so I will ask another one if that's okay.
Right.
So I was curious, you were mentioning about the student project. Is there any project that you would like to see happening that where students could potentially be helping you?
Yes, we have, we need help on our electric transportation work. So
okay.
I mentioned Susan Kidd earlier. We are actively looking for an intern for the fall and to work on our electric transportation policy. And equity and justice is a big part of our electric transportation policy also, because there are very few resources to get electric vehicles out to low income and the working poor, yet those vehicles require the least amount of maintenance and have the lowest cost to operate. So again, they're the people who should be getting them the most, but we don't have the policies to support that. And similarly, even if you do have an EV, the electric charging stations are not in the areas that most low-income people live. So we're working against ourselves, and we need help on that. It is not paid, I will tell you that, and I know that's unfortunate, but we, because of COVID and just how we've hit some things, had some budget cuts ourselves, as all nonprofits have, it's not paid, but we would hope someone would be able to find class credit or something of that nature. So we can get you the link for that internship.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that, and hopefully we can do something as well. Okay, now there's a lot of questions. So Molly's asking, are there any good ideas in think tanks about how to incentivize utility companies?
Yes, the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy has ACEEE. I would direct you to their resources.
Great. So much seems to be about politics. How can we make an impact in that way? I mean, besides voting.
Hold fundraisers. I started holding political fundraisers when I was in my mid-20s. I held one for a woman who had served in the city of Atlanta with her. She was in the city law department, and it was her first time running for office. Her name is Stacey Abrams. And there are a lot of people like that, first-time candidates. The woman, for instance, who's running for John Lewis's seat, Nikema Williams. She's not a first-time candidate, but she's somebody we need to all put ourselves behind. And I think that by getting to know candidates when you're in college, in your 20s, like that's a way to be a part of the decision making.
Is there a study that documents where power plants, incinerators, etc., have been sited near communities of color, similar to the work Dr. Robert Bullard did in his book, Dumping in Dixie? for Georgia? That's the question.
Yes, I cannot tell you that right off the top of my head, but yes. And I would also, one thing that's really living at the moment is two of the world's largest coal plants are in the state of Georgia. And Plant Sharer is the largest one, and it's the power plant that's right north of Macon. So it's the one I could see from my house growing up. And the residents of Juliet, Georgia, who are the town by Plant Sharer, they are actively complaining about water pollution. And there's a bill that went through the Georgia legislature this year trying to require increased regulation and monitoring of that coal ash, the way it's done in places like North Carolina. But I would encourage you, that's an active thing that we need more people to work on. And Mindy probably works on that. I should know if coal ash is one of the clinic's issues.
Yeah, Mindy actually says that Greenlaw published a report and she's going to share it with us.
Perfect. See, just have to ask Mindy.
So that's great. And then Kina is already putting out the link for us. Thank you for that. I think this is so great that, there's a lot of people that are in this talk as well that is contributing. So yeah, and then John is thanking you. Everybody's thanking you so much. And you are really an inspiration to us all. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And I wanted to show what we're going to be having next week before we leave. So as Mandy mentioned, we are going to have Sean Aurora, the director of Candida Building, next Monday. That's going to be a virtual tour of the building that Mandy was just talking about. And he's going to be discussing the sustainable design of the buildings as well. So I hope you can join us next Monday at 3 o'clock. And until then, stay safe and thank you again for joining.
Thank you all. It was a joy. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much, Mandy. This was so great.
Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.